Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagano, and we are back here in studio at the Hendrickson Library at the Institute for the Preservation of Western Civilization. We've got a very special treat for you today. We have an interview with Dr. Ernie Goss of Creighton University, economist, who is going to share with us his thoughts on the current state of the economy in Iowa, the Midwest, and across the country. So with no further ado, we're going to go ahead and play that interview for you. Well, we are joined here with Dr. Ernie Goss, and John, you gave me a very lengthy title here, a description that I'm supposed to read. It's very complimentary, but Dr. Goss, it says here, is the director of the Institute for Economic Inquiry and a professor of economics at Creighton University College of Business, where he holds the Jack A. McAllister Chair in Regional Economics. He's also director of the Goss Institute for Economic Research in Denver, Colorado, a bipartisan think tank conducting business and economic research and providing innovative, practical recommendations that affect change in public policy. And what we're going to get into today, Goss also oversees the Mid-American Economy Report. So I was already told I'm not supposed to call you Dr. Goss, but Ernie, again, this is your second time that you've joined us on our podcast, but welcome and thanks for making time for us.
Good to be with you and John. And back to the titles. Well, in academics, instead of getting a pay raise every year, they add another title on. That's how it works.
Yeah. Titles are free.
Titles are free.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I think I know John has some maybe more specific questions, but you do a lot of work looking at what's driving the economy, conditions. I'm not an economist, but I pay more attention to what are people's experiences with the economy right now. But from a macro level, where are we at in specifically Iowa, but the upper Midwest, or however you want to refer to it, and what from that 50,000 foot view, what's going on out there?
Well, Chris, you hear this. Well, the economy's doing great. But when you get down to the human being level, the human beings are saying not so great. So there seems to be a contradiction there. Well, it's not really a contradiction in the sense that the economy, it depends on who you are and where you are and what industry you're in. And as you said, we do two surveys here at Creighton University. One is a manufacturing survey. In manufacturing, I would say is either in a recession or certainly moving sideways, and that's been since January. The U.S. manufacturing sector has lost about 35,000 jobs this year alone, and that's fairly significant, and just indicating the slowdown in the manufacturing sector. We do another survey of agriculture. That's bankers, bank CEOs in rural areas of 10 states. The other surveys of 9 states, and that's right down the midsection of the country. And both the ag sector is in a recession. I'll state that somewhat emphatically. But even in agriculture, you're talking about two different areas. You're talking about livestock, which is doing somewhat better than grain. Grain in this part of the country, we're talking about principally corn, soybean, and wheat. And they are not doing well at all, and that's true. That's across all the 10 states we survey. And in livestock, somewhat better there. Cattle, beef, doing probably better than pork, for example. So it really depends on where you are. And if you go down to the individual level, you'll hear a lot of complaining about prices, of course, and that's justifiably so. Prices. Inflation's up, and Federal Reserve says, well, we whipped inflation. Well, not really. You brought it down, but you haven't whipped it. And we're still seeing embers of inflation. It's like when you put a campfire out, when you think you put a campfire out, and the embers are still burning there, and you go into the tent, and about midnight you wake up and there's a big fire out front. Well, that's the way it is right now. The inflation, they've certainly trimmed inflation down to between 2.5% to 3%, depends on how you measure it. But we're looking at that's going to flame up again, and the Fed's going to be reducing interest rates again. They're committed to that for November the 7th. So the prime interest rate will go down by 1/4% on November the 8th. And that's, I think they've gotten themselves in a corner, that's the Federal Reserve, by telegraphing they were going to reduce the rates. And I think if they had it to do over again, they would have not gone 50 basis points or 0.5% in September when they reduced rates. That was overdoing it, and now they're going to continue to reduce rates. I think they're taking a big risk, in my judgment, based on our surveys.
Yeah, that's concerning, and that's where. Let me back up a minute. I think you made a comment, I think, at the outset that I think is something that we try to remember is, what's happening at the individual level.
Right.
But before I kick it over to John, I noticed in the September survey, talked about job loss in, I think, manufacturing in Iowa, although that's all very closely tied to ag. I mean, we saw a lot of layoffs at John Deere,
Right.
Kinsey Manufacturing. I mean, those are obviously very closely tied to the ag economy, but I'm assuming we consider those manufacturers. But that's a lot of jobs and a lot of good paying jobs. And is there more to come, or are those preemptive? I mean, what do you see kind of at the job level, maybe looking out the next 12 months as we start factoring these things in?
Well, Chris and John, that's sort of the scary part. It's not going to be very comforting for non-economists. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics generates the employment numbers, and 40% was the response rate in September. Okay, so that's a horrible response rate. That's down from 60 to 70% since the pandemic. Now, I hate to keep measuring everything by pre and post pandemic, but it did change. In other words, these surveys are not very good, which when you have a sample size, what happens statistically speaking when your sample size gets smaller, even if it remains representative, and it probably doesn't remain representative. In other words, those who are doing better may be the responders, those who are doing poorly are the non-responders. But nonetheless, even if it's representative, the margin of error gets larger. Right. And we know the last time the numbers were adjusted for instead of a sample, we had a population, a census. They had overcounted jobs by 818,000 jobs. Now, in my way of thinking, I don't care if you're in India, 818,000 jobs is a lot of jobs. So it's unfortunately, policymakers and the Fed has some of the same data I have. Now, I don't have a fleet of 200 economists backing me up. It's mostly me and my computer. No, it's not really. We do have a fleet. My fleet is considerably smaller than 200. It's probably boils down to about 3. So it's scary to think that the employment numbers are not very good. How is this economy? And by the way, even when you look at that, the full-time jobs, we've lost full-time jobs last month. Full-time jobs, and the hours worked is coming down. So I mean, I hate to be the bearer of such. I won't call it horrible news. It's not horrible. It's just it's much weaker than being broadcast across the nation. And this part of the country, being more dependent on exports, being more dependent on agriculture, being more dependent on manufacturing, is probably doing less well. Again, I'll use the term less well rather than horrible. But back to your question about John Deere. That's the leading edge, and that's spilling over into the Iowa economy and other economies across this midsection of the country.
Yeah, John, go ahead. I know you've got plenty of questions here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you, Ernie. It's always an honor to visit with you, and I always enjoy your perspective. And when you talked about the agricultural recession, what do you think is driving that? Is it the commodity prices, or is it just the kind of uncertainty with trade, or what would be causing that? Because I think our Secretary of Agriculture said the same thing.
Yeah, it's all the above, John. I hate to say that. But the primary factor is lower commodity prices, ag commodity prices. You're talking about corn between 4 and 4.25 per bushel. That's below break even. Farmers are just not breaking even at 4.25. You got to, and so that's the number one factor. Second factor is increasing cost of inputs. In other words, fertilizer costs, those costs, like inflation's hit everybody, well, it's hit the farmer, and that's having an impact. And then if you combine that now, as a function of that, is exports. The global economy is slowing down. China particularly, and China is a big destination, for example, for soybean and pork. And soybean and pork those are two big agricultural commodities, important to Iowa and important to most states in this part of the nation.
And then I was surprised about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, in the Des Moines Register, they had an article where the Iowa Business Council said that inflation was dropping out of the top concerns for Iowa business leaders. But I just found that surprising. Do you think inflation's still a factor for businesses? I know certainly for consumers, for individuals, inflation is still an issue. I was at the grocery store the other day, and I carried my bags out, and it was almost over $150. I mean, so it's to me, it's inflation still seems to be a factor. But I was just surprised by the Iowa Business Council kind of saying that it's not a major concern.
It is still a factor, but it has come down dramatically. I'll say that. Now, I'm talking about, in our case, we're talking about the producer price index, not the CPI, consumer. So we're looking at it in our surveys from the producer price. And those have come down, yes. But again, back to my analogy of the embers in the campfire, they're still burning. And you could have gasoline poured on it about January the 15th. You say, well, what's January the 15th? That's when the longshoremen's may again strike. I mean, they pushed it out. I mean, I'm so tired of politics. And politics and economics are inextricably linked. And unfortunately, bad politics always beats good economics. And that's what we're seeing here. And you're going to probably see a strike. They're wanting 70 to 80% pay raise over 5 years, but that's not the worst part. They want to cease automation. Now, gosh, that's like, oh boy. I mean, for an economist, that's deadly. I mean, whatever wage rate, 70%'s on the rich side, but stopping automation, cutting back on automation is just a brew that's just not going to work.
Ernie, I was going to kind of save this for the end, time permitting, but you opened the door to it. So I want to ask, so it's a two-part question on you said automation, but the introduction of artificial intelligence into the economy, specifically on labor. What impacts have we seen off of that so far, and do you anticipate going forward and how that's going to impact our economy, specifically here in the Midwest?
Well, I hate to say this, but before I came to Creighton, I was at NASA, and I worked on a couple of projects on neural networks. And that was in 1992.
Yeah.
It's yet to really catch fire. That's 1992. Yeah. And it's just like the internet, not just like it, is similar to the internet, and the early efforts are costly. When I was with NASA, the early efforts at some of these complex systems were very expensive, didn't go very well, and cost the taxpayers a lot of money. And that's what we're seeing here. The early efforts are costly. The early adopters are going to be leading the way, and it's costing them more money. And there will be huge gains later on, but right now it's mostly cost. And the system where you see the most gains, if you want to call them gains, is the interaction voice recognition. That's where we're seeing a lot of it. In other words, when you call now, if you're asked to give your Social Security number or whatever, it's a voice recognition system, and that's where we're seeing. And then Chat GPT, but even Chat GPT, I use it. I use Chat GPT. But you have to check it. It makes errors, and it's not what it's cooked up to be, but it will be. I mean, so NVIDIA, and you say, well, everybody says, well, NVIDIA, look at that. NVIDIA is not the use of AI; it's the production of the chips that are used in AI. Well, those companies are going to do quite well. I mean, and you don't need me to tell you that. But the adopters, those who use these chips that are specially designed for AI, they're finding it costly right now, and the gains are just not there, but the costs are. So if I were, well, I am sort of a user of it, and I just wait on the others. I'm not Elon Musk. I don't want to be out there. He's out there, and I thank him for being out there, but I'll just wait and let everybody else endure the cost, and I'll enjoy the benefits.
Yeah.
I have to say, Ernie, I'm kind of a Luddite because I just turned in final grades to an online class I'm teaching, and I think close to 70% of my class, I think, used AI to write their papers. And then I went to a restaurant the other day, and the whole menu was automated, and I had no idea what to do. And I wonder what kind of implication that'll have on workforce, because I kind of felt stupid. I had to sit there and watch how other people were punching the screen to figure out how to order, and I'd never seen that before. And so it just seems like there's revolutionary things taking place, and to me the AI revolution is a little scary.
Oh, it is, John. You're talking about an application I encounter, and all of your viewers do as well. And I just started like, what are they eating over there? I'll take that. It looks good. I mean, I don't want to take when I walk in, and there are a lot of people like me. I don't want to be having my cell phone out. I get your cell phone out, the QR code reader there, and you read it in. Then I'm looking at this. I don't have my cell phone's much smaller than a menu. Give me a menu, please.
Yes.
I mean, and I have to say, yeah. I mean, and I worked with one of those restaurants, a very successful restaurant, on a consulting project, and they moved back to printed menus. I mean, if you want to get QR codes, if that's you can do it. And that's a well-known sushi restaurant, well-known throughout the Midwest and the Southwest. They've gone back because customers. I don't want to be. I mean, I don't want to have my cell phone out and having. No. I want to sit down and be with the person I'm with, or the persons, and I want to order my food. Look at and if they have pictures of the food, even better. That looks good. I'll take it. I don't want to.
You and John certainly are kindred spirits.
Yes.
That's encouraging. So.
And I don't think that's being a Luddite. I mean, I don't know. I think it's being sensible.
Yeah.
If I wanted to, and back to your point about ChatGPT, I'm teaching an online class beginning Monday, in fact, and I've said all your submissions have to be via Excel. Now, what does that mean? It means that does limit their ability to use ChatGPT. Now, it doesn't eliminate it, but it limits it. So if you let them use Word or whatever submissions, you'll get ChatGPT. In other words, even if you want to say, and my class is business valuation, so value that business there. Well, you can use ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will come up with an answer, not a good one, but it will come up with an answer, passing grade. They flew right through, and that's it. No, I'm not going to allow that. Or I shouldn't say I'm not going to allow it. I will try to prevent it. Yeah.
Yeah, American history and Excel don't really mix, but I might have to try that.
Well, I guess, let's see, how could you could ask, I don't know. I don't teach American history.
Yeah. A two-part question for you. I know, and this gets into politics, but I think it could have implications for Iowa, and a lot of it is uncertain, depending on the outcome of elections and stuff, but one is the uncertainty with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, if that's allowed to expire. And then the other day I was reading in the Wall Street Journal how the deficit again hit close to $2 trillion. If the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires and you see a tax increase on individuals and small business, and then what impact is that going to have on the economy? And then how can we continue to, is there and I know we probably don't know, but how long can we continue to run up this debt and these deficits? So, I mean, we're 35 trillion, and Is there going to be a tipping point at some time, do you think? I mean, where
Well,
the whole collapses?
John, I hate to tell you this, but well, you know it. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump just spent your great, great, great grandchildren's income for the year 2085, whatever, I don't know. I mean, they promised so much. And here's the, and one of them, I'll pick on Vice President Harris. She said, well, I'm going to continue the tax cuts for those making less than $400,000. Well, I hate to clue her in. She has to get that through Congress. She cannot do that. Nor can President Trump continue the 2017 tax cuts. He has to get that through Congress. So all these things are promising have to be approved and voted on by Congress and passed and then signed by the president. So this is perfect nonsense. I mean, perfect nonsense. They're promising everything. I mean, presidential candidate Harris promised 25,000 or 20, I've forgotten which it was, for black entrepreneurs. Well, not only is that unconstitutional, she can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, it's unconstitutional. That's a physical action that's to come out of Congress. So these two, they're treating us as if we're idiots, and perhaps they're correct. I don't know, maybe, but you can't do this. But to your point, what will that have if they did what they promised? Wow, you're talking about both of them. Now the deficit. Here's the deal: the deficit would be larger under Trump because he's not going to be raising taxes as much as Harris. But on the flip side, the economic catastrophe, I would call it, will be spread by both those promises. They will not, luckily for all of us, there are some individuals stopping that, but Harris proposes raising taxes. Now Trump does not, but he's going to raise tariffs. That's also not a good idea. I mean, my students, I wish I were teaching macroeconomics this semester and just say, come on, tell me all the bad ideas you're hearing. I mean, there are so many bad ideas, and they know they're bad ideas, but they know they won't be passed. Well, I proposed it wasn't me. Congress said no. Well, that's easy. And there's nothing better for a politician than to propose something that doesn't get passed, or to pass something that was going to be a problem with, have difficulties. So, that's this. And by the way, the 2017 tax cuts had positive impacts on corporate tax collections. Now, it's crazy talk to say, then they do, well, that's what caused the deficit. How about they passed, they being the Biden administration, remember Inflation and Deficit Reduction Act. Okay, that's what it's called to begin with. They had the good sense to take out the word deficit. They forgot to take out the word inflation. In other words, it did not reduce either one of them. It's increased inflation, but that act increased the deficit. I mean, and Trump contributed to that as well. I mean, this is a mutual, I don't want to say devastation. It's not good though. It's not devastation. I mean, it could be worse. We could be in France or Canada or Germany, where they've made even worse policy decisions than we have.
John and I have lamented that it doesn't seem like right now in Washington, D.C. that either party are truly fiscally conservative. And that's, ultimately the political scientist in me says that's the fault of the American voter as much as it is the political parties. But
well, this gives me a good chance to just do a breaking news story, because the Cato Institute came out with a study this morning and ranked for the second time in a row on their report card of the nation's governors, gave Governor Kim Reynolds the highest ranking for the most fiscally conservative governor. And the second runner-up was Nebraska's governor, Jim
Pillen,
yes, yeah, yep.
Yeah, well, I've worked with, I know both governors. I've worked with Governor Pillen, and I've met, and I won't say I've worked with Governor Reynolds, but I've been with her and shared the stage with her on different occasions. And Debbie Durham, head of economic development, I worked with her, and I find them very refreshingly economic sophisticates, I'll call it. And both of them, all three of those, and yes, better policy here. If you want bad policy, hey, go west, young man or young woman. You'll find it. You'll find it out west.
Chris, could I ask one more question if we have time?
Yeah, and then I got a kind of a follow-up that'll help us kind of land the airplane here.
And just one issue, and Ernie, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but it just kind of crossed my mind, is one issue that's facing, I know, people in Nebraska and Iowa is property taxes. Any thought on property taxes and the economy? I know there's a lot of states looking at how do we lower property taxes, and how does property taxes impact from an economic point of view in terms of businesses? And I know especially for small businesses that can be a significant issue. Is that something you've looked at before? Or?
I have, John, and I have to say I've done an analysis of that very issue, which, I mean, all taxes restrain growth. Now, they do contribute, the spending contributes to growth, depends as well, if the spending is thoughtful and good. So, but the one that has the most inhibiting factor, impact, is property taxes. Next would be income taxes. Now, is there a good tax? A sales tax has the least negative impact on growth. Okay, so when you have these high property taxes, as this part of the country does, and I'll give you an example. I own two homes, in addition to rental homes, but I have two homes at one vacation property, and it's down south, and they're about equal in value, not much difference. I pay $11,000 here in Nebraska property taxes a year. I pay $895 a year in my southern home. $895 versus $11,000. That, and as you and your viewers can tell, I'm closer to the end than the beginning of my career, and I at some point you're tempted to say, hey, I got to get out of here. Now, I'm not going to get out of here, but a lot of folks are. I have other factors that many factors keep me here, in addition to being the best part of the best nation on the face of the earth, by the way. But property taxes definitely restrain growth, and you've got to put some constraints on that. And you hear this thing about wealth tax. Well, it's a wealth tax. You're taxing unrealized capital gains. You are. And then when you go to sell that and you don't get that return, in other words, that house that they thought was worth $300,000 and $400,000 now, and by the way, that's another issue, is house prices are outrageous. We're 45. Americans are now, it's the unaffordability index is the highest on record. And that's true for this part of the country, not as true, but true for this part of the country as well as the rest of the nation, that property taxes, and I have rental properties as well. I don't manage them, I have a manager. I pay maintenance, insurance, and taxes are killing me, to the point that I'm probably going to have to sell some of the properties. I can't keep it up. I mean, the rents are just not, I'm losing money on these properties right as you and I speak, as we speak today. So property taxes, back to your point, that something has to be done there. And with taxes going up and up and up, and maintenance going up and up and up, and insurance on automobiles, for example, has doubled over the last 2 years. Almost doubled, 36%. It's unaffordable to live. I mean, and all of a sudden the solution is from Biden. It was, well, let's just cap rents. Cap rents, my eye. Are you kidding me? That is, I mean, even young teenagers know what our experience with price controls are. Not good. I mean, you find you find teenagers now. Well, I know what that has, and of course, But to the property taxes, freezing it, I mean, the focus, John, back to the point, the focus has to be the outrageous levels of spending. The growth in spending is where the action is. You've got to do something about spending. And you're in Iowa, you're doing something very, very, very good. And Governor Reynolds should be congratulated. Now, I'm teaching a private school, so I'm a little biased, but a private Jesuit school. Let's have some competition. Let's have competition. Private schools, let's compete. Well, in Nebraska, that's not so easily. It's not happening. And Governor Reynolds has done that, and that's going to be very supportive of growth in Iowa, and it's going to push some of the tax. It's going to make more competition, and you're going to have some good things come out. But that's long term. Right now, and by the way, I just sold a home. I owned a home in Iowa, and I sold it about 3 years ago. Property taxes there were outrageous. Not as bad as in Nebraska, but still bad. So something has to be done. But the focus on the spending side, which results in lower property taxes, and capping it. Caps just don't generally work. I think having competition, and I think Governor Reynolds has done the right thing there in my judgment. Of course, I'm in the private sector of education, not the public sector.
Well, that's encouraging to hear, Ernie, because that's something that we've really tried to stress as lawmakers look towards reform ideas on property taxes, is they have to get at the amount of spending that's happening, and that is driving the massive increase in property taxes year over year. And so, John, did you have anything else on that? Did I cut you off? Or
No, I
okay.
But
I guess I maybe to wrap up, Ernie. So we talked a little bit about property taxes just now, but what for a state level lawmaker? Obviously, economic trends are regional and national, but what should, in your mind, Governor Reynolds and state lawmakers, what sorts of policies should they continue to pursue or do to at least try and mitigate some of the economic trends and headwinds that we're facing?
Well, contrary to what's going on right now, and it's unbelievable that we're moving into global economy, into local. I mean, Iowa, Nebraska, this part of the country is part of the global economy. So Debbie Durham and her organization exporting Iowa goods. Now, she's, of course, the Director of Economic Development for the state of Iowa. And doing that, and focusing on you're talking about competitive industries. Iowa is very competitive, Nebraska is very competitive in certain things. So I think one of those things is in terms of agriculture and value-added agriculture. We hear that all the time. Value-added agriculture. Long term, in other words, I talked about agriculture being in a recession right now. It is. But long term, you couldn't be in a better industry going forward than doing that. But you have candidates for the presidential office. Both candidates are raising tariffs. I mean, do you really want to raise bananas in Iowa? No. Do you want to raise bananas in Nebraska? No. But if you start raising these barriers, all of a sudden you're going to have hothouse bananas in Iowa and Nebraska. No, we want trade, and we want to send them soybean and bring back the Guatemalan bananas, and that's what we want, and that's where we're competitive. So the scary part is at the presidential level and even at the congressional level, we've got individuals talking about, well, we got to protect our industries. No, we don't need. Iowa agriculture does not need the protections that other, like China's, needs. I mean, our farmers are going to outcompete Brazil, outcompete them all. So that's one thing I think there. And I think technology is going to be enhancing the ability to produce. You've got rural communities out there that have been depopulated. I mean, Iowa's lost a couple of congressional representatives over the last several decades. And to try to prevent that, I think to take advantage of some of the technology that allows me to live in rural Iowa and produce for the rest of the nation, and that we can do that now. Now, what we're producing, I mean, and I think one thing I do caution, I can't get over it. I've been in this part of the country now for 30 years now, and I come from the southeast Georgia, and they don't have the issue of, well, we got to keep young people here, bring young people there. You constantly this brain drain, and that's focusing on it is important, but it's something you almost have to accept. I have young men and women in my classes at Creighton. When they go away, they're saying, well, see you later, I can't wait to get the heck out of here. Well, you find out when they get to be 30, 35, they're back here. Do you really want to live in San Francisco? The answer is no. Not unless you're 25, 26, 27, I don't know. I had my last student, my student worker, he just left, graduated, San Francisco, here I come, with my Tesla car. And he can't lock his car up at night. And he's told me, I promise you, he said this. His parents gave him a new Tesla. I didn't have, well, my parents were not that way. Let's just put it that way. But anyway, he got a new Tesla, and he says he can't lock the doors. He doesn't even want to lock the trunk because people will break the lock, get in, find out nothing here. Well, you got a repair bill. So what I'm saying is there are things here that are very supportive of a family, and all sorts of families. I'm not talking about necessarily the traditional families. I'm talking about families that are over 30, individuals over 30 years of age. If you try to make policies to say, let's bring them back, let's make things so that we get these young men and women to move back here, I think you take advantage of what you got, which is a family-oriented part of the country. Now, I happen to be obviously older, so I'm that way, but I sit there and watch these young men and women. There's no kid, they're the thing they want. I can't wait to get out of Des Moines. I can't wait to get out of Omaha. And then they find out, wow, it wasn't so bad back there.
Yeah.
Now, they may not be going back to Mount Ayr, Iowa, but they're going back to Des Moines. They're going back to Dubuque. They're going back to other areas, Lincoln, Nebraska. So I think it's a policy that's really a mistake. It takes up too much energy. Let's be family friendly, but let's have competition among schools, among economists, we got to breed competition, and unfortunately we're going the other way. We're definitely moving in the other way right now, and that's particularly not good for this part of the country. If a 10% tariff, as President Trump wishes to enact, bad policy. And by the way, he can do that one without the Congress. That's the part. He can't do the taxes, he can't do the spending, but he can do the trade policy, and that's really not good. And Harris is the same way. I mean, Americans, even people in this part of the country, are supportive of trade barriers. Well, who wants trade barriers? Well, the person who gets a barrier to their particular product. I don't want any. Hey, no more Indian professors into this nation. Keep them out, because they're driving down my wages. Well, that's my problem. We need Indian doctors, professors. Let's just compete. We can compete. And that's the problem. Well, I know I'm getting a little excited here, but
and policy directors, because you tactically did a good job of waiting until the end of our time to bring up tariffs, because John's having to bite his tongue right there because he wants to jump in on this. He's as you may or may not know, John's decidedly on the other side of the trade issue from you, and I'd love to sit and listen to you guys hash that out sometime. But but your points are very well taken, Ernie. As I talk to Iowans, especially in the ag sector, I mean, you're right. They want markets for their products,
and that's changed.
Get good markets for those products.
When my family and I came to Nebraska in 1992, it was very different. Then you had the small farmers resistant to trade. Now I don't hear any resistance to trade, even among small farmers out there. Now I'm sure there are some, but I just don't hear it. Maybe I'm not in the right place.
Yeah.
But we have to we produce too much food for our domestic population. I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, you got to sell it. You got to sell it outside. And by the way, China, if you want to look at what Xi Jinping, head of Chinese Communist Party, his idea is his number one goal is not open markets or economic welfare. It's authoritarianism. He wants to squelch all the democracy. And in other words, I, as the government, I know best what's good for you. Well, that's anathema to an economist. We believe we know best. We individually, not economists, know best. We individually, all of us, collectively, we make good decisions. We send the government there to represent us, not the other way around. What the other way around would be there, but nonetheless.
Yeah. No, I think that dovetails nicely into how we try and represent this, is that people can do a better job and make better decisions with their money than government can.
Absolutely.
And, that's sort of a foundational principle that we hold.
Oh,
John, any closing thoughts or comments before we sign off? Or
No, I just want to thank Ernie. I could visit with him all day, and it's just always an honor to have him join us. And I wish I could sit in some of his classes too. I always enjoy when you're at Iowa Press, and especially enjoy it when you're with us. So thank you for doing this.
well, I'll be on Market to Market the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So you're
good.
familiar with Market to Market, of course.
Oh,
Yes. Yep.
I'm an Iowan, Ernie. I know. Yeah. So
I love
I-
that show. I watch it every week. I never miss that in Iowa Press.
Yeah.
I love they're two of
Listen,
I think two of the best shows around for letting us know what's going on with our own, what's going on in us, for us. I love it.
My favorite show of all time, of course, it's not on anymore, was the McLaughlin Group. That was my favorite public affairs show.
That was, now I got called, when I was called a curmudgeon many years ago, and he was the curmudgeon.
Yes.
John
Yeah.
McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a great one.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, again, thank you for being so generous with your time, Ernie. A lot of really good stuff here.
Yeah.
It's an honor to have you back on the show, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I'd love to, Chris, and I'm honored to be on your show, you and John, and thanks for having me on, and more than happy anytime. These are, I guess, obvious to your viewers, that near and dear to my heart. I get a little too excited, I think, but that's
Oh, it's great.
yeah. I don't have to. Here's the beauty of it. I have never and will never run for public office. In other words, I think being in public office restrains you somewhat. You can't be wild and crazy like a professor,
Yeah.
Well, having been in elected office for a good chunk of my professional life, I can tell you that there is a lot of impact that can be had on public policy outside of elected office, and sometimes even more so than being on the inside. So,
well,
that's a good place to be.
I hope this doesn't sound too accommodating or whatever, but coming here, I think this part of the country gets better representation, in my view, and than some other parts of the nation where there's. My mother once, when I came here, my mother said, "Have you ever seen the governor?" And I'm like, "You mean today?" Where on earth could you sit down with the governor, sit down with the senator, sit down? Only here, and I think there are some real benefits to that, and it shows up in public policy, I believe.
Yep. There's a real accountability that comes with that when the folks have that level of access to their leaders. I agree completely.
Absolutely.
Well, good. Well, we'll wrap it up for today. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to doing it again sometime soon.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Chris.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. See if I can